Let me ask you about something else that's curious, and I find this so astonishing. I can't even believe it. But again, I went on Google and I typed in Event 201. And the first hit that came up was not a conspiracy theory page or even Wikipedia. It was Johns Hopkins. And
Yeah.
it was a description of Event 201, sponsored by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. On October 18th, 2019, the who's who in the virology vaccine world had sort of a simulation, a war game simulation of a pandemic event. And it wasn't just a medical simulation, it was a political simulation and a media simulation. And by the way, this was when COVID-19 was already out of the genie was out of the bottle. I don't know the exact date that has been accepted as the beginning of it. But October 18th, 2019, I think it's generally accepted that the virus was out, and some people would have known it by then. And Event 201 was a war game where Bill Gates was up to his eyeballs. What do you know about Event 201? Do you think that they knew that COVID-19 was afoot and this wasn't actually just a hypothetical scenario? This was, okay, guys, we've got about a month before this gets serious. Let's try and think this one through politically, militarily, economically. What the heck happened in Event 201?
So one of the things you left out with that preamble is that there were two main sponsors of Event 201, which was held at a basically a think tank at Johns Hopkins that's known to be closely affiliated with the CIA. The two sponsors were the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the World Economic Forum. This is one of a series of war games that have been run for decades. And it is, at a minimum, Event 201 was amazingly prescient. Were the participants there aware that the virus may have entered the population in Wuhan with the military games that preceded that? Or did the virus enter the population in Wuhan in November? That's all that timeline is still murky. But there's no question that Event 201 pulled together a selected participant list of people that largely had a bias towards a more military or militarized responses to a outbreak threat. And I argue that if you bring together, if you're going to do a war game planning exercise, you have to have a broad representation of the population. But unfortunately, our government has had a tendency, and this is pseudo-government, this is government plus these large NGOs, has a tendency to bring together people that are kind of insiders in the industry, plus, for instance, in this case, the press people that have ties, for instance, in Council on Foreign Relations, which many of the press people from CNN and MSNBC are members of that, and intelligence community people and defense community people. And it's no surprise if you bring together a group of people that have a bias towards authoritarian responses that you're going to end up with a plan to respond to a public health emergency that is very authoritarian. And it appears that the plan that was developed, whether it was developed with awareness that that particular coronavirus had already entered, or that something akin to that was highly likely, certainly there was awareness that something like what we now call SARS-CoV-2 would originate and potentially sweep the world. And clearly there was research multi-staged research going over many years to develop a novel coronavirus that was much more highly infectious in humans. So I argue that what happened was in Event 201, they came up with a war game plan that was very heavy-handed, authoritarian, based on three core assumptions. One was that we would have a highly lethal, highly infectious coronavirus. That was false. This virus is nowhere near anything close to the lethality, for instance, of Ebola. That we would have a effective and safe vaccine produced rapidly. And at that point, the investments in the RNA vaccination technology were already maturing. Moderna had been assembled with CIA money, etc. And the third assumption was that there would be no drugs that would be effective in a timely fashion against this agent, this hypothetical new coronavirus. And we had, whatever the relationship is, it's lost in the midst of time. And I'm not privy to the information. I don't know if we'll ever get to the bottom of how this virus entered the population intentionally or unintentionally. But it did. It was highly infectious. It swept through the entire globe, perhaps facilitated by a failure of China to do lockdowns before the Chinese New Year, which is traditionally a time of diaspora from Wuhan and China throughout the world, and certainly facilitated the rapid transmission globally. And the governments, particularly the Western governments, particularly the Five Eyes nations, that's the intelligence alliance that ties together Great Britain, the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, implemented this very heavy-handed authoritarian response that had been planned in Event 201. And the way I like to put it is that it's taught in every war college in the world, I'm sure, that your plans are only good until you encounter the enemy. And then you have to re-envision them. You have to replan based on the ground truth of what you're encountering. And that was never done. So they had those three core assumptions. All of them were wrong. The vaccine is not safe and effective. Existing drugs could be used very effectively to treat this virus. And this virus was nowhere near as lethal as was presumed based on the Chinese propaganda, which was probably informed by what, may well have been informed by Event 201. It may have been playing to the audience and telling them what the audience expected to hear. But there's no question that these governments implemented this very heavy-handed authoritarian plan in lockstep. And as they did it, they also brought in aspects of the Chinese response, particularly the lockdown strategies. And the Brownstone Institute has done a great job of tracking these citizen journalists, the cascade of events that led to the wholesale importation of what was called the China solution, the CCP strategy of lockdowns, masking, social distancing, et cetera, and implementing it in the Western nations, although that was very different from what the plans had been based on prior World Health Organization consensus and prior outbreak planning. So Event 201 absolutely happened. It is, at a minimum, rather odd that it was held at that point in time. It does appear in retrospect that Mr. Gates is able to leverage the insider knowledge that he gains from funding these types of war games to make strategic investments. And he did make, by his own account, huge amounts of money on his investments in the vaccine industry, including in the RNA vaccine industry.
That was an excerpt from the Ezra Levant Show. I'm Ezra Levant. Every weekday, I do a monologue about the topic of the day. Then I interview a fascinating guest, either in studio or via Skype. And then I read your mail, whether it's fan mail or hate mail, which is sometimes even more interesting. This is on our premium service, though, called Rebel News Plus. Go to rebelnewsplus.com. It's $8 a month or less if you buy a whole year in advance. You get my show every weeknight, plus Sheila Gunn Reid's show every week. It's called The Gun Show. It's pretty amazing. You know, we rely on you because we do not take a dime from the government. In Canada, that makes us almost unique. So please help us out and help yourself to some great journalism at rebelnewsplus.com.